The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to our study of cutting through spiritual materialism. So presently we're engaging in a big topic in Buddhism, which is the topic of shunyata. And I think, like I mentioned last time, we perceive this as the great mother and the great feminine. It's the womb of all reality. So there's a very beautiful praise, actually, from the, I think it's from the Prajnaparamita, a praise of the mother, and it goes beyond language, thought, and expression. You are unborn, unceasing, like the nature of the sky, being the scope of one's own wisdom. I bow to you, mother of all the Buddhas of the three times. Now, in engaging the topic of wisdom or emptiness, shunyata, when we say wisdom, wisdom is the one that engages. So, like I think we also mentioned last time, it's prajna that sees emptiness. It's the prajna, the wisdom, the insight that is no longer caught on the appearances and sees beyond the appearances. It's what we in common language could refer to as smarts, being intelligent, to see through deception. And that's the quality of prajna, that it sees that phenomena don't exist as solid, but they are in fact constructs. Praticca samutpada, they're dependent arising, they're dependent circumstantial phenomena that appear due to conditions come together. And prajna is the one that sees through what our ordinary confused mind doesn't see, which is that there's no such a thing as a solidly existing self, a solidly existing other. The way that we engage this understanding is through analysis and through an increased prajna, an increasing scope of understanding. And this we've then been describing here in this chapter. And so hopefully my attempt to sort of put some structure into this chapter, just so you don't just sort of feel, gosh, this is one big barrage of of rather dense perspectives. Then the initial part was about the Heart Sutra, which is really key in the culture of Buddhism and the discussion of dependent arising and emptiness. There's a lot of there is no this, there is no that, because it's really just refuting or challenging the assumption that there is some solidly existing phenomena. So there's a lot of there is no this, no that, and so on. Essentially going through the what we call from the level of form right up until omniscience. Whether you want to include that or not, that's up to you. But you could say all phenomenal appearances, they are seen to have no inherent existence. Now, there's some teaching on this, and of course we don't just say things are just empty. We also understand that emptiness applies to anything. It applies to anything that appears. And it's not as if emptiness is an absolute reality in itself either. It's just lack of inherent existence, but it doesn't mean that then the reality is that there's nothing. It's more that whatever there is, we're not caught by it. We're not deceived. So we talk about form is empty, but then again, there's no such a thing as just an absolute empty. There's also form within emptiness. In fact, they're not two different things. So we covered that in the first section, which was about the Heart Sutra and its teaching. And then we went on to Madhyamika, which is a very important teaching, which essentially cultivates this critical attitude with regards to our assumptions and attempts to pigeonhole things with philosophy. So Madhyamika both addresses what we could call the innate ignorance, which is just our general clinging to the self, what we call the self of person and the self of phenomena, but it also refutes the attempts to reduce phenomena to philosophy. So it takes out a lot of, it challenges the idea that we could reduce reality to just philosophy and ideas. And that's where Madhyamika can get a bit dense, because it's about refuting all these positions. What we have in the Mahayana tradition is then Yogacarya tradition, which essentially taking inspiration in the Madhyamika, but went on to posit as something that could be talked about and described everything in terms of the mind, which of course is realistic enough when we're speaking about relative truth. Problem is if we begin to say that this mind is absolute as well. So we looked at last time how even this notion of the mind only and non-duality is also something that we can't dwell on or assert as something that we can hang our hat on, a comfort zone of non-duality. That also doesn't work. The beautiful thing really of what we're trying to say here is that we could actually live beautifully without trying to put conceptual labels on everything. And in fact, our confusion comes from this objectification of phenomena. So we are really presenting something that is ultimately very, very beautiful. And in this, that the Buddha discovered reality is good in and of itself. And it's really just the whole project of what we're doing is just trying to dismantle all our rather occasionally misguided attempts to make sense of reality and try to formulate it, like Trungpa was just talking about the mystery and so on. So it's coming from the Buddha's good news, the gospel of the Buddha, if you like, that reality in and of itself, our nature in and of itself, is good. That's the message of Buddha nature. But we'll never get to that if we continue to operate with some of these obscurations that we have. And so we have a path to cure us, a remedy for this confusion. And that's what we then have in the Buddhist path. And that in approaching that, then it's good to have some idea what we're going, particularly us who come from the modern culture of, most of us are educated, we have analytical, critical minds. We do need to take into account that we need some idea of where we're going. And that's why we do have this thing called the view, which is the perspective that we bring to the practice. So I apologize, I didn't finish last time, and today we'll do the end of this chapter on shunyata, and then we'll also do the chapter on prajna and compassion, and then we'll do another class on the chapter on tantra, which is quite large, and so we'll do that. What is it again? I think it was it the 7th? The 7th of Thursday, the 7th of December. So I apologize for not finishing everything. Little bit circumstances beyond my control. No, it's not the 7th, it's the 6th. So we have a date on December the 6th. I'm going to be going away for a week, so I can't do it then, but I can't do it next Thursday, but the following. So anyway, so just with regards to then Trungpa Rinpoche highlighting Nagarjuna's philosophy, he says Nagarjuna's way was one of non-philosophy, which was not simply another philosophy at all. He said the wise should not dwell in the middle either. So with the middle way, or the Madhyamaka, we then have that essentially as a discourse or a system of dismantling You could say it's the philosophy to end all philosophies. It dismantles philosophy and it doesn't put anything in its place. But that's, of course, an important perspective. Trungpa just says, reality just is, and this is what is meant by the term shunyata. Through this insight, the watcher which separates us from the world is removed. Not in the sense that all of a sudden we go away, our cognition goes away, but you could say the opinionatedness, the insecurity that is setting up this barrier between self and other. So Nagarjuna pointed to how the non-dual experience of mind requires that there still is something watching, and that's the problem with the Yogacharya in his opinion. The thing is, actually, the Yogacharya came after Nagarjuna, but then later, you could say, formulators of the middle way, they made a point about the problem with some of the Yogacharya claims. But the middle way approach is to free the mind even of such subtle reference points as non-duality, and to settle with then what is. The experience operates very simply. The sage is not someone who is confused or deluded, and that's essentially, you could say, the bottom line. It's just removing confusion, but not coming in with some new equation or, the secret of the universe, level 42 and all that. So it basically means not dwelling on anything. So this is insight into reality, and that is then what defines the sage. What is the scope of the sage? This freedom from any the insecurity that requires reference points, credentials. And this is then what we call absolute truth, this insight, this non-delusion. But it doesn't contradict or conflict with the ordinary perceptions of this world. Sansa Rinpoche will often quote this sutra called Meeting of the Parent and Child, in which he says, I never ever contradict the ways of the world. What worldly people say, I agree with them. So in that sense, the sage operates, and we operate with what is called relative truth. We operate within the relative world. That's no problem. And there's, of course, you have cause and effect and so on. So we do speak about these two levels of truth. One, which is the scope of the sage or the Buddha that sees things as they are, and the other is the scope of ordinary beings. But the sage also knows how ordinary beings and ordinary convention operates. So Trungpa says, so shunyata is not merely awareness of what we are and how we are in relation to such and such an object, but rather it is clarity which transcends conceptual padding and unnecessary confusions. One is no longer fascinated by the object, nor involved as a subject. It is freedom from this and that. What remains is open space, the absence of this and that dichotomy. This is what is meant by the middle way, or Madhyamaka. So by the way, when we say Madhyamika, we're referring to the system. When we speak about Madhyamika, we're referring to the practitioners, or I guess to some extent also the school of the middle way. But the middle way, it's important. It's not like a third way. You have the extreme here, left, right, and then the middle way, that's the right way, the middle of the road, sort of the golden mean and all that. That's not what's meant by the middle way. It's the non-dwelling. It's a very great place. It's non-confusion. It's enlightenment. So the point of this is that we're not just talking about emptiness, but we're talking about the mind that is liberated, the clarity that transcends conceptual padding, the way that we normally, in our insecurity, put labels on things. There's a mind, the original primordial wisdom that doesn't require that. So to understand what is being taught here, we need actual experience. Trungpa Rinpoche's own students would do years of practice before even beginning Ngundro. We learn in order to uncover what was already there. We learn in order to unlearn. Trungpa Rinpoche quotes Nagarjuna, who says in his commentary on Madhyamika, just as the sun dispels darkness, the perfect sage has conquered the false habits of mind. He does not see the mind or thought derived from the mind. So here the mind is understood as the confused mind. So this is what the sage has conquered. Now, in this being taught, it should be understood that we don't just subscribe to this and then say, well, now my new opinion is the middle way. Obviously, that would defeat the purpose. It's the absence of opinion. That's the beauty of it. And that actually is not something that's easily done. And that's why we need to do practice. Within the context of Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, we have a culture of practicing in various ways, but very much engaging in studying the Dharma, practicing it, and attempting to pursue the gradual path through Nundro or whatever it might be. Trungpa Rinpoche, he would actually have students at least just do sitting meditation for 2 or 3 years before they would then go to what's called seminary. And there they, for 12 weeks, would study and practice the theory and practice of Buddhism. And only then would they begin the Nundro practice. But the result was also that they would, once they started Nundro, they would complete. There's an extraordinary amount of people who, in very short time, completed the Nundro and went on to main practice of Vajrayana. So to lay a foundation of experience is very, very important. So we're studying this as practitioners. This whole approach is very much practice oriented. And that also is reflected in the next, which is when we have the Heart Sutra, it ends with the chanting of a mantra. This might seem curious. Trungpa Rinpoche talks about this then. Om gate gate, paragate, parasamgate bodhisoha. And in the sutra it reads, therefore the mantra of transcendent knowledge, the mantra of deep insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra which calms all suffering, should be known as truth, for there is no deception. And in this chapter, Trungpa Rinpoche, he writes at one point, when the basic, absolute, ultimate hypocrisy, and hypocrisy is an interesting word because it means that there's some sort of like attempt to be something that you're not. And that's a problem with spirituality, that it comes very easy, and that's implicit in spiritual materialism. That's implicit, there's a little bit of agenda that serves the ego. And that's where eliminating or completely removing any handles or labels or reference points, unmasking any of ego's attempts to solidify, when that has been exposed, and that is what the teaching of Shunyata does, then one really begins to see the jewel shining in its brightness. And the jewel is this uncontaminated wisdom, the prajna, if you like, the mother of all the Buddhas. And this is the energetic living quality of openness, the living quality of surrender, the living quality of renunciation. Renunciation here, I think, refers to elimination of any obscurations, basically. So this is the outcome of the sutra, if you like, and this is the outcome of the experience of shunyata, and it's something that has a living quality. So that's where, to express this, we don't necessarily use philosophy. Then we go into something which is very profound, which is mantra. And mantra is engaging sound, it's engaging speech, which normally we do with words and philosophy, like we're doing here. But actually, mantra goes beyond the ordinary language, beyond the conceptual language. And you could say mantra is a reverberation of enlightenment. It's a reverberation of what we could call the primordial nada, the primordial quality of manifestation at its most subtle level, which is sound. And in fact, with mantra, we have a reverberation of nature. It's the sound of reality of the universe. It's elegant, unconfused speech. And it's through the yoga of speech then that we align and engage our being within the manifest qualities of enlightenment, taking us to the non-manifest qualities of enlightenment, or we engage the manifest quality of enlightenment to take us or align us with what is not manifest, the inconspicuous. So this particular mantra then celebrates the vivid quality of what needs no ground, hence gone beyond. What has gone beyond are the two veils of emotional and cognitive obscurations, and what is left is then the naked, unmasked, open, luminous quality that shines forth. And this is then what the mantra celebrates. Renunciation in this instance is not just throwing away, but having thrown everything away, we begin to feel the living quality of peace. And this particular peace is not feeble peace, feeble openness, but it has a strong character, an invincible quality, an unshakable quality, because it admits no gaps of hypocrisy. Renunciation of conceptual constructs brings peace. Such peace does not want anything. It doesn't need to defend anything. So we're renouncing these obscurations and reference points that our ordinary insecurity requires. And we shift from being teetering on continual uncertainty and the anxiety that comes with the insecure self. We shift from that into a place of openness where we actually look and experience. And this is then the space of wisdom. And that's then the living quality of unconditional and pervasive peace. This is also referred to in terms of victory and fearlessness, not in the aggressive sense of us versus the other. It's not about putting somebody down, but it's a victory in the sense of being free from the need to defend ourselves. We don't need anything. We don't want anything. That's victory. So emptiness or shunyata, you could say, is the objective nature of phenomena. It cannot be grasped. It is empty. It is unceasingly phenomena. It is form, but that form cannot be grasped. And hence, these two, form and emptiness, are not two different things. So the Prajnaparamita teaching that shows this reality shows us the paradox that there is in phenomena. And that is what divides Buddhas and sentient beings, knowing that or not. So there is the form, and when we're a sentient being mistaken, we see this form as substantial phenomena. Seeing it that is empty, we're free. So phenomena, they appear, yet they are empty. So we speak of the unity of appearance and emptiness, and this we do a lot in Tantra. Sonsei Rinpoche talks about how samsara originates once we divorce appearance and emptiness. So when we begin to understand the natural conditions of things, then it's a condition of awakening, and it's a condition where we're no longer held by our confusion. We don't need to replace it with anything. We're free. But the single thing that makes a difference between sentient beings and Buddhas is this recognizing the nature of, you could say, the projections or the manifest nature of phenomena, knowing that they are not external, they're not other, they're not solid. Sonsei Rinpoche, in his house in India, he used to have a poster on the wall, and you sort of saw this big monster, a bit like in the Wheel of Existence. And then in the middle, there was a little narrative where it says, once there was a man who was asleep and having a dream where he was being pursued by a huge and ferocious monster. Finally, the monster caught him, and the man cried out in terror, "What are you going to do to me?" "I don't know," replied the monster. "It's your dream." Your dream. Next, we'll look at the chapter called Prajna and Compassion. Here to your left, you have Chenrezi, Avalokiteshvara, and on the crown of Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha Amitabha signifying the lotus family. And in the chapter of Tantra, we're going to be looking at what these various families, lotus family, what that signifies. But Chenrezi embodies the qualities of prajna and compassion. The lotus in his left hand symbolizes prajna, and the mala in his right hand symbolizes compassion. And then with that, he holds the gem of wisdom. This is what we call principal deity of Tibet, actually. And this is associated with the chanting of the mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. So in the previous, we've seen how that we recognize that the labels that we attribute to phenomena, they're baseless. We recognize that these appearances, form is emptiness. And then again, emptiness is not some absolute. It's not a exclusive thing. Once we realize emptiness, then there's nothing. That's not at all the case. It's just that we realize that phenomena, they're not as solid as they appear, and this space is continually manifesting. Emptiness is form as well. And so, just as we saw previously, where the Zen master says, when I eat, when I sleep, then this understanding of simplicity, form and emptiness, is realized plainly in its simplicity. Yes, there is still the consciousness of a knower. And as Trungpa Rinpoche points out, we might still have some dwelling on that. We need to engage that. And that is where this awareness of the awake knower becomes the scope and the subject of the Vajrayana. And I'd just like to say something a little bit sort of leading up to the next chapter we're going to have about Vajrayana. And it's just a little bit something about when we study, let's say, Shunyata and Madhyamika and so on, we sometimes do it as a little bit different from the way that we approach it here in the Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. By the way, CTSM is the acronym for the book we're studying, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. But Trungpa Rinpoche, very much with an awareness of his audience and the cultural discourse, his approach is very much speaking from the intuitive angle of experience. And that's because, and he can do that because he's so at home in the modern culture. He's such a master of the modern language and its imagery and so on. So that's where we speak more of these topics of emptiness and so on from the point of view of the experiencer. In classical presentations, and many of you will know that, you find more of what you would call an ontological or a scientific or an analytical perspective, where emptiness is established on the basis of what we call valid establishment, that we actually analyze phenomena and we can assert how can we know truth. What can we use? What we can use it in terms of what we can ascertain with direct perception as well as inference and so on, and also, of course, to some extent, scripture. But mainly, the establishment of emptiness is based on us analyzing directly phenomena and seeing its constructed nature, and that, you could say, more scientific or analytical approach you find in classical presentations, and because it's addressed in a Indo-Tibetan context, then it's very often quite difficult for the modern audience to sustain their engagement with some of these studies. So we have to thank many of the kind young lamas who are, regardless, they don't give up on us in the West, and they keep teaching teachings like the Prajna Paramita and Madhyamika. And also good on all the Buddhists who follow this, because it's not easy. And that's why we with Cutting Through and Trungpa Rinpoche's style of teaching, we actually have something that's very helpful, certainly as it's very complementary to the classical approach. Also, there's a little bit of a difference in terms of, you could say, philosophical perspective. The analytical approach lends itself to an understanding of objective reality as per then the second turning of the wheel on the topic of emptiness. We'll analyze, yes, because phenomena are dependent arising, then they don't possess essence. And that's what we're looking objectively at phenomena. Trungpa talk more about the letting go of the watcher and the no self, right? It's much more on the subjective level. And so we could call this the intuitive approach, which is experiential, subjective, and so on. And that's more aligned then with the third turning of the wheel, which is more about the Buddha nature or the wisdom that sees this. And that again also is more the angle of Vajrayana that we're going to be looking at. So it's just to have a little bit of perspective on this. The analytical approach, according to the confined ordinary mind, is the scope of the sutras. You could say this way that we analyze things and so on, seeing the dependent arising nature of phenomena and their ultimate emptiness. This is very much what we find in the Prajnaparamita. And that lends itself to the rational, you could say, confined ordinary mind. Whereas the Tantras more operate with an actual experience of vipassana. And it goes beyond the rational, it's experiential. And it's a much greater seeing, which is the pure vision of wisdom. And that is what we have in the pure perception that we find in the Tantras, which is the scope, the way that the non-confused wisdom sees reality. Just to sort of little bit clarify these two, since the next chapter on Tantra will be coming from that angle, but also in the present context, I think this is at this point, quite helpful. So Trungpa says, compassion is very powerful, but it must be directed by the intelligence of prajna, just as intelligence needs the atmosphere of the basic openness of compassion. The two must come simultaneously. And he also says, compassion contains fundamental fearlessness, fearlessness without hesitation. This fearlessness is marked by tremendous generosity, in contrast to the fearlessness of exerting one's power over others. This generous fearlessness is the fundamental nature of compassion and transcends the animal instinct of ego. Ego would like to establish its own territory, whereas compassion is completely open and welcoming. It is a gesture of generosity which excludes no one. So as we're approaching the issue of prajna and compassion, the point is that these two are basically inseparable. Prajna is something that cuts through the ignorance, that centers on a self that actually doesn't exist. So the prajna cuts through this deception. And what is found then is the natural warmth that emerges, which was trapped in the neurosis of self-centering. Then there's a natural warmth that emerges. So it's organic. And this compassion has no partiality, like the earlier Trungpa spoke about how the compassion of enlightenment is like the moon that will shine in whichever bowl is there. There's no tension from the moon, but it's just when there's a bowl that can reflect, the moon is there. So this quality of wisdom possesses these two aspects, the prajna and the compassion, as something that's inseparable. Compassion begins to play a part in the practice of meditation when you experience not only calm and peace, but also warmth. There is a great feeling of warmth which gives rise to an attitude of openness and welcoming. When this feeling arises, there's no longer any anxiety or fear that external agents will act as obstacles to your practice of meditation. So fearlessness is that we have to let go of these small games of deception, and rather through the practice we're connecting to a much greater space that possesses this and is suffused with this light and this warmth of compassion. It's the nature of things. Again, nothing to do with philosophy. This is not an opinion. This is not a practice. It's not moralism. It's experience. And it is what the path is about. This instinctive warmth, which is developed in meditation practice, also extends into the post-meditation experience of awareness. With this kind of true awareness, you cannot divorce yourself from your activity. To do so would be impossible. So we are afflicted all across our lives. We're affected throughout our lives by prajna and compassion as practitioners. We become less reserved, less cautious, more open, less judgmental. We don't need to clutch onto something spiritual or some sort of forced mindfulness. Our life is more informed by the warmth of open space, and it comes naturally, unforced. Actually, let me just see if there's no questions. Okay. Don't hesitate if you have questions. Always remember, if you ask a question, it could very well help others as well. Out of compassion, please ask questions. Generally, awareness is absent in our lives. We are completely absorbed in whatever we're doing, and we forget the rest of the environment. We seal it off. But the positive force of compassion and prajna is open and intelligent, sharp and penetrating, giving us a panoramic view of life, which reveals not only specific actions and events, but their whole environments as well. This creates the right situation for communication with other people. So, for us to do what's said here requires practice of the path. Again, this is not moralism that we should now be in a particular way, even though moralism and the determination to be a good person or a compassionate, intelligent person is a good resolve. We should more appreciate that the discipline, the hard work that lies in the practice of the path. If you're practicing the Dharmaga, your 2 hours every day, or the Ngunduga, whatever your commitment is, or whatever practice you're doing, it's not particularly based on ego's wish for something that will gratify, the sort of the spiritual hunger that needs to be satisfied. It's not like that. It's application. It's hard work. It's good hard work. It has a sense of being real. But it's not about pleasing ego. And that's where the application of the practice of the path, it's important that we have some sense of what it is about. And that's where the awareness that what we're doing is very important. So what we're talking about here is that which is created through the path, through the discipline, through the meditation, and through the wisdom. And this enables us to relate to a much wider and larger space, which includes the other and the environment and the other people. In dealing with other people, we must not only be aware of what they are saying, but we must also be open to the whole tone of their being. A person's actual words and smile represent only a small fraction of his communication. What is equally important is the quality of his presence, the way he presents himself to us. This communicates much more than words alone. So, with the practice of the path, then, we find an alternative to our own bubble. You can say we normally are rather self-involved, and meditation and the practice of the path pops this bubble. So, where we are normally consciously or unconsciously, as Trungpa said before, we go through life very often without any awareness. And in doing so, we are very either consciously or unconsciously trapped in these narratives that drive us, these self-centered narratives. So with practice, we begin to shed that, and we begin to become more aware of a larger space, and we become more aware of and sensitive to others. And we begin to take interest in the others beyond just what they're saying, beyond the ideas, beyond their opinions. And that's where we are sensitized to a much greater quality of who they are. So we find it interesting and we're engaged in them, and we can appreciate what they're saying and what they're doing and projecting, but we also see it in a larger perspective altogether. We have this aerial perspective. Again, try and notice here the style of the discourse, which is again all about the experience in terms of how we feel. When this is discussed, for example, in a classical context, compassion will be objectively assessing you could say, the debt we have to others and the pragmatism of the practice of compassion. It doesn't necessarily go into how we will feel, but because we in the modern world, we're rather feel oriented and very much about our experience and so on. This grips us much more than some of the, you could say, objective arguments for why we would be compassionate. Again, this is very complementary with the classical style. So Trungpa just says, when a person is both wise and compassionate, his actions are very skillful and radiate enormous energy. This skillful action is referred to as upaya. Skillful means. Here, skillful does not mean devious or diplomatic. Upaya just happens in response to a situation. Upaya comes from this quality of compassion that sees what is required. So skillful means there's no real linear way of how things are going to necessarily be done. There's no script as such, but it does imply that we're responding with an intelligence. And so this intelligence is not manipulative. It has that, it's endowed with the prajna that has seen through self-centering and the compassion that takes delight in the other. So the sage rests in peace, and relating is simple and uncontrived. So the sage might be very gentle. The sage might also be blunt. And the sage will relate to the demands and the energy of the situation without necessarily following some plan or script. True compassion is ruthless from ego's point of view because it does not consider ego's drive to maintain itself. It is crazy wisdom. It is totally wise, but it is crazy as well because it does not relate to ego's literal and simple-minded attempts to secure its own effort. Crazy wisdom does not mean that people behave in a crazy way. It rather means that it doesn't abide. It's not something linear. There's not a formula for how it's done. And in that way, it's free. It's unscripted. It's spontaneous. Crazy like that. And this is important in this day and age where crazy wisdom sometimes is used as so it comes up in the media when in these criticisms of lamas and so on, where they would say, "Oh yeah, such a lama in this Buddhist tradition they subscribe to crazy wisdom, so the lama's going to act in a wild and possibly aggressive or unkind way," and that's really and it's actually unfortunate because that very often comes from Buddhist spokespersons who says, "Oh yeah, but our teacher is a crazy wisdom teacher," and that's doesn't work unless you really understand what crazy wisdom is. Not something about behaving in a wild way. It's very subtle. It really it really comes from this understanding that we've been talking about of prajna, that's endowed with the warmth of compassion. And as such, just engages organically, but spontaneously. So compassion certainly doesn't mean some sort of a sweet, fuzzy, warm, predictable, gentle action. So Trungpa Rinpoche talks about that as being the grandmother's love approach. Rather, compassion is ruled by insight, and an insight that is unbound by conventional script. So it's called crazy wisdom. So it doesn't mean wild. It just means it responds to what needs to be done. Sometimes that might be gentle. Sometimes it might be being ruthless. We work at our regular jobs and rent a cozy room or apartment for ourselves. We would like to continue in this way, but suddenly something happens which tears us out of our secure little nest. Either we become extremely depressed or something outrageously painful occurs. We begin to wonder why heaven has been so unkind. So we might think that if just we play it by the script and we do what we're supposed to be doing and we're good boys and girls, then everything will work out smoothly. I remember once Tonsakan Rinpoche, he says, hell is where you get everything you want, or where you're never contradicted. And it's the wisdom and the compassion, you could say our merit, that enables us to all of a sudden maybe be torn out of things. We can sometimes talk about, okay, karma and merit, right? Good karma might mean that we have everything we could ever want. And that good karma, if you like, leads us to just fritter away our lives in pointless distraction, right? Say good karma? Who knows? Merit, however, could be that everything goes wrong. And that enables us to actually question the nature of reality in ourselves and what we can do and where we could actually begin to relate honestly without the agenda of ego. We begin to catch on to basically what's implicit in the Dharma. And that's merit. So that something all of a sudden tears us out of our little comfort zone or our little nest is actually the result of our merit. So this is actually compassion. It's the compassion of reality. So if we have the merit and if we made the aspiration, actually, some of you will know there's a line in an aspiration by Jigme Lingpa that says, may I never be caught up with conventional expectations and demands. And even if I do, may they not succeed. So we've set ourselves up so that we actually aspire that may I not succeed in what is essentially delusional and time waste. If I in a moment engage myself in time waste and think that's the thing to do, may that not succeed. Basically, may I be free from pointless distraction. And that's why there's some wisdom that takes place when it appears that the world is being cruel to us. What are we trying to secure? Why are we so concerned to protect ourselves? The sudden energy of ruthless compassion severs us from our comforts and securities. If we were never to experience this kind of shock, we would not be able to grow. We have to be jarred out of our regular, repetitive, and comfortable lifestyles. The point of meditation is not merely to be an honest or good person in the conventional sense, trying only to maintain our security. We must begin to become compassionate and wise in the fundamental sense, open and relating to the world as it is. So we have committed ourselves to the path of awakening. And that means awakening means not slumbering along or being unconsciously submerged in some unconscious comfort zone where we can hide out. We've actually invited in the compassion and the wisdom of reality. We've taken that step. That's implicit in our taking refuge. And so we've invited genuine insight through engaging in the path. And we're engaging in the path that was taken by the Buddha. So we're blessed by these continual invitations that might sever us from our comforts and securities. This takes us out of our hideaway. And with the practice of the path, then, we begin to see the futility of wishing to secure ourselves the way we've done it up until now. We begin to see the inspiration in it. We begin to enjoy it. And that gives fearlessness. And it also gives a joy that's called mahasukha, which is not the joy of getting what you want, but because that basically just perpetuates this poverty and insecurity. I need something. But the mahasukha is the unconditionality that we're fearless in reality. And that mahasukha is the great confidence. And that's the great joy. See if there's any questions. Okay. Being open to another's tone does not always seem easy in application. What when in openness one meets with angularity and freneticism in their expression, while seeing and experiencing them in the wider perspective? Is it about remaining spacious, even in the presence of such occasional monstrosity? Even if we know this monstrosity is momentary and empty? Yes, that's the short answer. It is about remaining spacious. It's about noticing that we will have fear and we'll be reacting. I mean, we could have this, we could be aware of the subtlety and the texture and the other, the passive aggressive or the unspoken aggression of one kind or another, or agendas. And it's not necessarily helpful to right away expose that. And that's why it's about having both the sensitivity to the detail, but also seeing the wider perspective, which is then removing our own fear. Or even if we have fear, which can be quite helpful, and fear is really a stepping stone for us to actually apply ourselves, to be mindful, to be aware of the open space. Then there is this dimension then of vipassana, or greater space, and that's what we want to bring to this situation. That is what our life has taught us works. Our life has taught that the other one of losing the space doesn't work. Does that make sense? But it's an important point. And again, it's a bit like when we train in martial arts, where we have to keep training. And so for us to actually successfully apply this, it means that we need to continual practice meditation. And it also means that our meditation should be informed by compassion, that we see the relevance and the compassionate nature of the path. And this becomes our motivation for practicing meditation. But meditation is so important. We're constantly in Buddhism, we're constantly talking about all these things of, seeing more and more. It requires that we recognize them intellectually, but we do need to practice meditation. Regardless of what we're doing, whether it's Nunda practice or form practice or sitting practice, there has to be this place where it dismantles our ordinary habitual patterns. Did you say that joy is our confidence and fearlessness of reality as it is? I believe I did. I was talking about Mahasukha, which comes from this not needing to maintain our security, being open and relating to the world as it is. So that's where we don't gain our joy from getting what we want, and rather our joy is being at ease in the world, being confident in the world, being fearless, and that's the great joy. So it's unconditional joy. So, in regard to the question about the remaining spacious, then I'm glad if it makes sense. I find the sensitivity arising in me towards the other somehow blends with the reactivity, my ego. Yes, I think we can all say, tell me about it. This is the human condition. And of course, that's where all the interaction with others is so valuable. Quite very often is the benchmark for how our practice is going. But we never give up. And of course, we are always tied up with reactivity, but we never give up. Prego. So next time we'll look at the chapter on Tantra. And I was just speaking with one of Trungpa Rinpoche's close students, translator from the Nalanda Translation Committee, Larry Mermelstein, the other day, and he was mentioning how one of the great tulkus from Shichen Monastery, who travels a fair bit in the West, Changling Rinpoche. He was in his early years, he was close with Dilgo Rinpoche. And in these days, he's one of the important lamas that really uphold the Shichen monastery. But he was teaching, cutting through spiritual materialism. I'm very curious about how he did that, really. And it's so wonderful to see a Tibetan teacher actually take something as extraordinarily non-Tibetan as cutting through is. The content is exactly the same, but like I say, the angle is very different, and it is so cutting through has so much insight into the modern psychology. So it's wonderful to see a traditional teacher, which Changling Rinpoche is. He's very modern, speaks English and all of that, but yes, he also has the whole traditional training and experience. He's a great teacher. So it's wonderful him teaching it, and he identified what he called then ground, path, and fruition in words of my perfect teacher, cutting through spiritual materialism, where the first chapters, they are the ground, and then from the Four Noble Truths and up until where we are now, that's the path, and then the chapter on Tantra is fruition. So we could say in this book, like I was saying, the building on the identifying the ego, the styles of the barbarian ego, that's the stepping stone for presenting the Buddhist teaching. So the first chapters that very much are about the need for seeing the spiritual materialist neurosis, and also identifying the need for surrender and the need for meeting an actual teacher. This is very Vajrayana, because we're not just talking about just vipassana mindfulness. Continually we come back to the interaction and the apprenticeship with somebody living. So it is very much presented from the point of view of the Vajrayana path, which is so much about relating to the Guru. And so the first chapters, they speak about this, the spiritual materialism and the surrender and the need for the so the meeting of minds, and then the Four Noble Truths, which then proceeds as it has right now from the foundational aspects of suffering and its cause up through the development then to of prajna and compassion. So this really provides the main part. It's actually we're actually fully exposed to understand all the aspects of the Buddhist teaching at this point. And then we go on to the result, and what we literally call the resultant vehicle, which is Tantra, which is Vajrayana. So the next chapter is then about engaging with this perspective of the Buddha nature as it exists within ourselves and within our world. So I think we'll do that next time. So the 6th of December, we'll meet again. So apologizing for not getting it all completed. Yes, the 6th. Okay. There's a little something I wanted to show you. That's very beautiful. It's a poem. And it's from a longer poem that was written by Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. He visited Trungpa Rinpoche in the States in 1976. This was Khyentse Rinpoche's first visit to the West. He first went to Europe, traveled to France and Scandinavia and England, and then he went on to the States so he was in Europe, I think it was November, December 75, and then traveled on to the States in the beginning of 76. But as he was leaving, he wrote some poems, and this is actually just part of a long poem that he wrote. But I'll just read it for you, and you have it here. As old man, brilliant moon travels in the sky. Now, as you probably know, brilliant moon is Khyentse Rinpoche's name, Rapso Dawa. And ocean of Dharma in Tibetan is Chögyam or Chögyamsa. So as old man, brilliant moon travels in the sky, Prince Ocean of Dharma remains on the ground. Though in the illusion of circumstance, there seems to be great distance between. In the mind's hard realm of one flavor, separations do not exist. Brilliant moon's light garland streams from heaven's height. From the moment it touches ocean of Dharma on the ground, it becomes activity for the welfare of others, dispelling the torment of the dark age. Since in the absolute meaning there is no separation, this self-expression of auspicious coincidence occurs. The only father, Padmadrima's shoot of wisdom, this refers to Trungpa Rinpoche's teacher, who was called Pema Chime. The only father, Pema Trima's shoot of wisdom, blossoms by design in ocean of Dharma's pond. Brilliant moon pours on the Amrita of truth. There is no other way for us to meet again and again. From cool ocean of Dharma, rivers in the four directions, east, west, south, north, temporarily flow. But since they are one in the great ocean of Buddha activity for the welfare of the teachings and beings, the prince enters the one realm of brilliant moon. Little teardrops trickle from the corners of the eyes of the only son, and a vivid sadness arises in the old father's mind moon. This is the fruition of our mutual prayer, not to be separated throughout our lives. Having confidence in this, we rest in uncontrived innate space. Thank you. See you in 2 weeks' time.